joining us. And we are live. Thanks, everyone. Good morning. I'm honored to be here. I consider it a privilege. Any I get to spend with you and to talk about the things that matter. Consider it a privilege and an honor to be here. It certainly is always a blessing to wake up in the morning. I've come to the conclusion that you can't take life for granted, that anything can happen more and more every day. I'm becoming more and more aware of how fragile life is and how anything can happen in the intervening hours between the time I see you in the mornings and then whenever you watch this playback and then the next time that I see you. So I'm so grateful and thrilled to be here in one piece because many times this morning it was real iffy. So thank God for traveling mercies. Right? Right. So today we're going to talk about trust issues, and I'm going to tell you where this. Hey, how is everybody doing? Thanks for the shout out. And I wanted to say that this came as a result, honestly, a few days ago, I was on my Instagram feed and I follow a guy named Deion Sanders. Everybody knows him. He was a football great some years ago and he's in retirement now. And he doesn't play professionally, but he's a professional commentator for the NFL. And he had a thingy, a Instagram video on his feed, on his page, in which he was talking about trust. No, I don't know Joe Rogan uh, or know of him. And in this video, he was talking about, does your man trust you? Can he trust you? And I was like, can I trust him? Conversely speaking. So I thought I'd talk about, do you have trust issues? And how does this impact our relationships? And I feel like we're going around the same mountain. We keep going around the same mountain because relationships matter. Recently, I was talking to someone who is gravely ill, and family becomes an issue when someone is ill. And when she began describing the issues that are taking place within her family, I recognized them for what they are. It's that she's ill and they don't know how to compute it. They don't know how to band it together and how to deal with it. And a lot of it came from, so the past history becomes an issue, even with how she relates to her ex-husband. It's almost as if because she looks great, they don't trust that she's really ill. And so we were talking about it from within the context. Ray Ellis. Hi. Oh my goodness. Ray Ellis. Hello. How are you? Shout out to you. It's been a while. Thank you for stopping by. I really appreciate that. I haven't seen you or talked in a while, but you know what? We're going to get you in on the show because you absolutely, over the years, have been my sounding board for relationships. And whatever you say is exactly how it goes. You can follow him on Twitter. His name is Ray Ellis. He's an author. And he writes a lot about these issues. You certainly should follow him. He's an author and a speaker, and he's a former police officer. I believe Ray's probably retired by now. Aren't you? Right? And I'm going to have him chime in a few, set up something. I have missed you too. We're going to set up something so come fall, we'll talk about relationships. He gives tremendous insight into this stuff. So we were talking about trust issues and how important those are, and even in our everyday relationships. As I was telling you about someone I know who is ill and how the family is reacting to her illness, it certainly suggests there are issues of trust. If I lost my voice a little bit, I was on the phone until way in the night last night trying to. No, I'm also on YouTube and Facebook Live. So you can join me, and Twitter. So when I go to Twitter, it connects my Periscope feeds. So that's why. So we're on other platforms as well. And what happens is people, we underestimate trust. And I wanted to get into it because we're going around the mountain of divorce. There's too much divorce in our society. People get married and then they don't want to stay together, they don't like each other anymore after a short time. People live together for extended periods of time and have children, ostensibly with a view to making it permanent. I mean, if you sit there and have 3 children with someone, that suggests that you think this is a permanent thing. But you don't get married because you don't trust that the person is going to be there with you forever. So we have trust issues. Say we all have issues. We all have issues, and especially issues of trust. And those become especially manifest in relationships and in our intimate relationships. There are, of course, trust issues that take place in our jobs and those you can't help. Though it is what it is. We all know by now that you go to work, you don't expect friendships at work. You go to work. So the folks at work are not your friends. They're people whom you work with. So it's a professional environment. You maintain it in that environment and in that context, right? We go to church. Again, those are people whom you worship with. Doesn't mean you go to them and tell them your every little nitty, permanent, private desire. Those are people who are most likely to take a bullhorn and broadcast everything. So be mindful of what is in that environment. So your primary relationship, not the one you have with God, but the primary relationship is the one you have with your spouse. Do you have trust issues there? And I'm going to outline some reasons why we all encounter trust issues and why we seem to not trust the people whom we're in intimate partnerships with. Whether those committed partnerships are marital or they're long term with a view to becoming marital. I personally, I prefer marriage. I think if you're going to live with someone, I think you should marry them. It's safer and it's better for both of you, right? It gives you certain options to ensure that you have some stability. Marriage keeps the society together. We can't overlook that. Marriage reduces the poverty rates because when you're married, you have 2 incomes and people are more committed to staying with one another. Therefore, you are providing for one another, right? So, marriage is a good thing. It makes you emotionally stable so you don't run from one person to the other, right? So I advocate for marriage because I think it's the best possible way. And it gives you a sense of connectedness and emotional stability that provides you with the engine and the fuel you need to run your everyday life. I don't like when you just come together and you just live together because then when you separate, what are the protections for the children and what are the protections for yourself? What do you do with your money, right? So let's examine trust. Well, what is trust? Basically, trust is simply me trusting you that you are going to do what you say you're going to do. It's you hire a handyman and he says he can fix your floors upon the execution of the task you pay him. If he doesn't, then you have a recourse. Unfortunately, relationships are not contractual. We don't sign a contract, but we do have a verbal agreement. Yes? That's why I encourage marriage because marriage is a verbal agreement that is supported by law. So even though you stand before people and you say, I take this man, I take this woman, right? It's a verbal agreement. But guess what? The law supports that verbal agreement. So that's why I prefer marriage, right? So you get together and you have a relationship, you just meet one another. Trust is not something someone just telling you, you trust me. Trust is proven over time. You meet someone and you start going out, and sometimes we get so caught up in our hormones and we get so caught up in the moment, we ignore the issues that tell us that this person may not be as trustworthy as they appear to be or they present themselves. I find that we are so quick to jump into relationships and jump into situations and invest our emotions in situations that we possibly should not have, which invariably result in grievous harm to ourselves. We need to take the time to perhaps examine the people with whom we're inviting into relationships. Who is this? Raven Bishop. Hi. Thank you, my love. I have been a good influence on you. Hey. Hey there. Right? So we need to perhaps look at what are we saying to one another? Or what are we saying to people who we couple with? Right? I have found that when we get together in the heat of the moment, I'm very wary of relationships that start and within 30 days and within 60 days you've moved in together. I'm very wary of those because it suggests to me that someone else is pushing their own desires onto someone else. I'm also very wary of people who take advantage of someone else's vulnerabilities. Let me tell you, give you a history, a case in point. A few months ago, a friend of mine lost someone very dear to her. 6 months later, she had another major loss. In the season of grief, she was conflicted. Suddenly, she became aware that she was alone. And even though she's been alone for closer to 20 years, all of a sudden, there was this rush to go join up with someone and become a couple. She met someone, and the person told her that she's the woman he's been waiting on. Are you listening? And she went ahead, they started dating. She told me that she'd started dating someone. And then we went to lunch one day, and she told me he had moved in. I was so affected and so distressed. I literally got up from the table and walked away. I couldn't deal with it. Why? Because I could see that this man was taking advantage of her vulnerabilities and that she had placed her trust in someone who had nefarious intentions. He was taking advantage of her emotions, the fact that she had just lost two loved ones within less than 6 months. And so she had a wellspring of emotions, and he stepped in. I'm going to respond to what Ray is saying in just a minute, right? Before you know it, guess what happened? He's in her house. Her family are coming over. He's involved in her house. And then she found out that when he said he was going to work, he wasn't actually at work. The properties that he said he owned, he never owned anything. And the money that he claimed to have had, because they're both at that stage in life when they're both retired, he doesn't have anything. So it seemed to her all of a sudden that he had nothing, and that the only reason he had attached himself to her was because of her own financial stability. He was literally looking for somewhere to sleep. Now, did I know this? I didn't know all of that, but I just knew he wasn't trustworthy. And I didn't want to offend her or hurt her because she was so invested in it. But you know what I could do? I could pray, right? And I prayed really hard. And she kept talking about the sun shining through him. And I'm like, am I the only person around her who is seeing that this is wrong? Eventually, she realized that there was something wrong. When she finally brought up the subject, I said, listen very carefully. I could see it from a mile away, and all I could do was pray. So from now on, before you do anything else, run it by your family. Do you see what I'm saying? That's misplaced trust, right? Let me see what Ray is saying. Ray says, back in the 90s, Harvard did a study on marriage and common law. By the way, do we have any control as to who we fall for? No, you don't. So Harvard did a study on marriage and common law relationships. They found that marriage provided the security and stability that was not found in cohabitation or common law relationships. They also found that the longer a couple live together in an unmarried status, the more likely the marriage will fail. Say it one more time for those in the penny section to hear, right? So Harvard did a study on common law and marital relationships. And what they found was the longer people live together, the less likely that the more likely that the marriage will fail, right? And that marriage provides security and stability. So please get married. Stop living together. It's not healthy for anyone, right? And here's the thing. Somebody just asked a question that do we have any control over who we fall for? Absolutely not. If that were the case, wouldn't we all fall for Brad Pitt? Ladies, Denzel, anybody? We We don't have any control over who we fall for. That's why it's love. It kind of selects the person, and you don't have any control over who you fall for, but you do have control over your own actions. Okay, you have control over your own actions. I have control over my actions. Yes, I fell in love with him, but that does he proved to be untrustworthy. I could never have married him because he cheated. What if I had married him? I would have been emotionally destroyed. Do you see what I'm saying? So you need to spend time with someone, not living with them, but spending time with them. Now, truthfully, when we met, he had intention of, settling down, and I was I wanted to, sure, but he thought we should live together because, and I said, I cannot do that within my context as who I am. But that's not what I advocate. That's not what I tell folks to do. And I'm not going to tell people to do one thing and I do the other. And especially because we have children. I said, you have children, I have children. We cannot teach our children that it's okay to shack up and live together. But when you're in love, logic and reasoning is clouded. And that's why you need friends and less emotion. Logic and reasoning are clouded because we're in love with the idea, all the hormones that are released, and it gives you this euphoric feeling. But if you wait for that feeling to pass, reality will set in. And you will be able to see the person. Is this someone that I can live with? Right? Now, in my friend's case, was that someone she could live with? No, because he broke her trust. He told her one thing, and then another was found out to be true. So immediately there could be no relationship, right? What about in the areas where you meet someone and they tell you they are divorced, and then you find out they're not divorced, they're just separated? Is that someone you should continue seeing? I leave that up to you. What do you think? Do you think so? The first issue is, could you trust this person again? You meet someone and they're still seeing their ex, but they tell you that it's because we have the children together. Is that someone you should trust? You have to make that decision about whether that's a good place for you to invest yourself. Let's face it. Let's face it. You have to look at it for what does it mean to you and what does it do for you. If you don't feel good about it, and if it is not going to make you a better person, why should you be there? If you look at it this way, it's very simple. If you have to continue worrying about when they're not with you, there are two things that are wrong there. You have to look at yourself. Is this a valid reason for me to feel this way? Or is this something that there is something going on? And if you can't answer, if your answer to one, our article you read says longer eventually go apart. Is it true for married couples too? No, the article that we're talking about is a study that was done by Harvard. What it says is that marriage provides stability and security that is not found in common law relationships, and that the longer people live together, the less likely that marriage is going to last. Right? Food for thought, isn't it? Look at it this way. It's really very simple. When you live with someone, even if you live with them for 20 years, you're actually not living with a real person. You're living with their cousin or their shadow. You're seeing the best parts of them because they're still treating it as if you're dating. So they're going to put their best foot forward. They're always going to be on their best behavior, even if it's for 20 years. When you get married, however, all bets are off. You start seeing the person. As a matter of fact, the longer you are exposed to them is the more you start seeing them. And you have to ask yourself, is this something that I can invest myself in? And especially if you're coming from a relationship prior to that had ended in a negative way. And let's face it, most of us today have been around the block more than once. And so we are perhaps having relationship issues, right? We do have issues because we were married before. And I'm just going to be honest with you, in today's world, that's up for grabs. I was talking to a young man yesterday. He's 21 and he's from Lebanon, right? And he, is young, and he says my daughter was there, so he was like, he's looking for someone to marry. So I said, well, What's the problem? I mean, a 21-year-old young man who is almost ready to graduate college, I kid you not, and is looking for someone to marry and wants to get married and wants to buy a house because he started asking my daughter questions about where she went to school and, what did she study. And then he wanted to know how to buy a house and stuff like that. So we looked at him like, is there something wrong with this picture? It's so unusual. So I said to him, but why haven't you? And he says, well, he's Arab, and he says most American girls don't want to get married. They want to shop for 10 years and be engaged for another 10 years before they get married. And I was like, whoo, whoo, whoo. I couldn't say anything. And I'm like, what is wrong with us? You know where a lot of this come from? A lot of this come from celebrities who live together for extended periods of time and who don't do anything about getting married. And now all of a sudden, everybody wants to be married. Marriage is money maker for the state. You don't need them to have an intimate relationship. Okay, that's your opinion. Common law is also living together so you can get out of it before you get married and commit. No, I am divorced. But I'm happy that I was married because at the end of it, there were laws and rules that could be imposed on the separation of that and the dissolution of that union. Had we not been married, it would have been a cluster of issues. Do you see what I'm saying? And it makes for a messy separation. People live together and have children together, and then they break up and they go to court, and we're like, the rest of us are like, so what happens now? Well, I bought the TVs, I bought the couch, so I can get it. Well, possession is 9/10 of the law. So how are you going to get it out of your house? Well, I helped her to buy her car and I helped her to buy the house. Well, how are you going to prove that? You don't have a claim to it because your name is not on the deed. Your name is not on the car. Do you see where I'm coming from? And we don't think, we have allowed ourselves to be influenced by people who are wealthier than we are and who, for all intents and purposes, before they live with someone, they have them execute a domestic partnership agreement. In the rush to be coupled up, we don't execute a domestic partnership agreement. We jump into bed, jump into someone's house, they jump into our house, we live together, and boom, 2 or 3 years later, it's over. And it's like, well, I brought my clothes here. Well, take your clothes on the way out. Or I bought that toaster oven, or I fixed up your basement, or I fixed up your house. I bought you that new Mercedes. Well, prove it. Do you see what I'm saying? It's in my name, so prove it. Right? So the important thing is at the beginning of the relationship, I feel like we need to sit down and have a conversation. One of the things we have found, people do not talk to one another. Right? Now, in days gone by, they probably, do you think prenup is a good idea and newly married think of it as not romantic? I think the more assets that you have, I think you should protect yourself because who knows what can happen. So I think you should engage in some sort of contractual agreement if that is your issue. If you and typically you're going to ask for a prenup because you think people will leave, they marry you for your money. So the more money you have is the more likely you are to think that someone is marrying you for what you have. And therefore, you are going to want to protect yourself, which is always advisable. Go find a lawyer to consult with that. But I believe there's a simple contract you can execute before you do that. You need to talk first. Find out what are your deal breakers. Find out where it's broken. What is it for you that is an absolutely no-go? I think people need to talk to one another. I think we need to talk and find out what is it that happened. And here's the thing. You're not going to believe this, but you should ask what happened in the last relationship. How long did it last? It gives you a clue as to what happened to the person, how they think. Let them explain to you what happened. Let them tell you how it's separated. You can tell if they're lying or not, right? Because the goal is you're trying to figure out if you are going to stay with me. Are you going to stay with me? What happened? You have to ask these questions, especially if you're thinking of long-term coupling. Nowadays, people are very casual. They get together for a hookup. They meet in a bar and sit down in a bar, and before you know it, boom, yay, yay, boom, yay, yay. And you expect out of that that a coupling should take place? You've got to be kidding, right? What about those people who meet at a strip club? More power to you, right? More power to you. I mean, think about that. What are you expecting, right? All right, somebody's saying it is not easy to find the right person these days. People hook up online with how they look. Well, there is that. My friend, whom I told you about, has an online profile. And I became very concerned for her as she tried to, find someone to go out with and keep, and going out with people whom she just meets online. You have to be really careful. You meet someone online, you feel like you've been talking forever and the chemistry is right, and before you know it, they start coming over to your house, you're going over to their house, and so on, right? You have to be really, really careful about those issues, right? Love can be blind. It's as blind as you want it to be blind, and for how long you want it to be blind, because at some point you're going to wake up and you're going to see for what it is. You have to ask yourself, is this something that I can live with? What if you have a partner who somehow doesn't know how to interact with the opposite sex? What if he thinks that talking and flirting is okay, but it doesn't mean anything? Well, how do you feel about it? Is there something in your past that you haven't dealt with that contributes to your feeling? Is it baggage you're carrying from previous relationships, or do you plain just don't trust them? You have to ask yourself that question, because these are nagging issues. And there are some people for whom trust is not an issue. Do you know that? There are some people for whom trust is not an issue. There are some people who cheating and so on and betrayal doesn't matter. They can get past that. I applaud those people, because to me, it's so fundamental. I need to know that I can trust you, that when I go to bed to lay down at night, you're not planning to leave me to go sleep with someone else. You're not planning to leave me while I'm here investing in you. You're not planning to just run off with the next person who comes along. Trust is an important issue. And here's the thing, once trust is broken, do you know it's very, very hard to get it back? I am not saying it's ever going to be restored to what it once was. What you're going to do is create a new normal. But once it's broken, it's hard for it to come back. So the thing to do is not to break it. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you enter into relationships, there are some things that you perhaps should look out for. Do you know that? If you are going to be with someone and this is someone that you plan to be with or reasonably want to spend some time with, my advice to you is to protect yourself. Learn to be mindful of the issues that you have. Let's say you're a man who is accustomed to being with different 3 or 4 different women all at the same time. Chances are you are perpetually in the mindset that you are not attached to anybody. So you're always scanning the room and looking for the next victim, the next conquest. But you have someone whom you value, then you need to put yourself in a frame where you don't look at anyone else. Discipline yourself. It's just like what they teach in sexual harassment to men in work settings. You're interacting with a female, you don't look below her chest. Don't look below her neck. Focus on her face. Don't look below the chin. You're interacting with members of the opposite sex. Look here. And avoid touching people. Right? If you know you have issues, avoid touching people. One of the things I'm finding is that we lack discipline. We lack self-discipline. We will jeopardize everything. We will jeopardize our long-term relationships for a temporary satisfaction. We will jeopardize a relationship that means everything to us just to get a feel good, just a cup of feel, just to feel good in the moment. And then we turn around and blame the other partner for not standing with you and not being there. Well, you broke the trust. And when you break the trust, it rarely is ever to come back, right? Should I look at the for her? I'm not sure what that means, right? But do you see what I mean? So try not to break it. So here's the thing. Ask yourself this question. What is it that you're uncomfortable with? For some people, it's money. Are you comfortable with someone else spending your money? Like my friend, she said that the man pretended that he was working. Turns out he wasn't. So he would give her a debit card to take care of expenses, but it never had enough. It was always declining. It never had enough. So after a while, she just forgot about it and just paid for everything. So she began to realize that there were some issues there. He broke her trust, right? Don't let it get that far. Sit down and talk about the issues that matter. So at the beginning of the relationship is when that conversation takes place. And if the person is not on the same page as you are probably going to say, well, they might come around. Not necessarily. That's how come you end up with people living together for 10 years, because you keep living in hope that they will turn around and come around. I'm of the belief that if we didn't agree to get married now, you're probably not going to agree to get married in 2 or 3 years. So I'm wasting my time. Right? Are you a love advocate? Yes. Who should pay for the first date? And how expensive should it be? Are you trying to impress that person, or are you trying to just go out and have a good time to get to know the person? That should be the determining factor on how much money to spend. And who should pay for it? The man should. Even if she is wealthy, even if she offers to, you should say thank you, but it's on me. Later on, you can share expenses, but the first date, the man should pay for it. That's a step in the right direction. Ladies, quit acting like, well, I'm here and I can do this. Is this a date? Or is this something that you and your friends are going to hang out? Have that established up front. I mean, have you as a backup. And if he can't pay for it, then you know you need to leave that alone. Because chances are that means you're going to end up like my friend, end up paying for everything. Right? And that's probably not what you want. The other thing to do is to not settle. If you're feeling that this person is not trustworthy, you probably should follow your instinct and not settle. Right? All right. Ray Ellis is saying, as my grandmother told me, if they're bad, you can't love them good. Wow. Huh. Something the man paying is old tradition. There's nothing wrong with tradition. Part of the problem we're having today is that we threw a lot of good things out the window with tradition. And I'm not saying that all the things of old are good. Some of those things need to be addressed and need to be conformed to contemporary lifestyles. Yes. But I still think that you should look at trust, right? And here's the thing. Don't settle. Just because you like someone doesn't mean they're good for you. That's what happened to my friend. She liked him. Even though everything in her that she knew about relationships, because she's been a counselor, go figure. That's why sitting across from her shocked me, because I'm like, you should be psychoanalyzing yourself and realize how bad this is. So everything in her was screaming not to trust him. But she said, she said, if you're going to say, then you need to be well on your way out of that. There's some things that my grandmother said, a leopard can't change his spots. There's some things that people can change. My thing is, if they are willing to come forward and say, look, I have issues in this area and I am working on it, and here is what happened, and here's what I'm doing to change it, then that's someone that you perhaps should listen to. That's someone who is being accountable and is going to hold you accountable. I heard a man say some time ago, he's been married for over 30 years, right? And he said when they just got married, he said he had an issue with women and looking at women. And his wife, he had to ask his wife to help him. And he said how they did it was she would elbow him if he stared too long. So he learned real quick, or she would start clearing her throat. He said one time he was staring so bad, she punched him in his side. He said he never got over that, so he never did it again. But you see what happens? He allowed himself to be held accountable. He recognized he had an issue and he held himself accountable. Sometimes that's what we need. So if you meet someone and they say, well, I have issues in the area of cheating. I've cheated before. They're probably not going to say I've cheated before. A true cheater will never admit to having a problem with cheating. But you know how you're going to find out? You're going to know by how many relationships they have had and how many multiples. If they can't sit down and say, I'm not in it, ask them if they're in a relationship right now. If the answer is no, I'm not. But if the answer is no, that means they're currently seeing someone. I kid you not, just ask. And if they can't answer truthfully, how are you going to trust them with everything else? Right? If someone can't tell you that they're not working and they don't have money, then how are you going to trust them moving forward? Do you see? And we'll talk about money and relationships on a whole other day, because some people say, well, if they don't have money, I'm not talking to them. Or it depends on what the situation is. We have come so far from being people that we don't even know what we are. So you go couple up with someone who has all the money in the world and you still get left. I heard a story yesterday that was pretty shocking. And here's the thing about being unequally yoked. I don't believe that I should be with someone who has millions more than I do. I'm outmanned, I'm outgunned, I'm outspaced there. Why? That person is going to use their money power on me. And it's going to tell. We need to find people whom we're on equal footing with. Okay? It saves a lot. You have to talk to one another and be frank. Look, I don't have as much money as you have. Is that a problem? Is that going to be an issue for you? Because when the marriage starts breaking apart, what are they going to say? I met you when you had nothing. You were an old so-and-so and I rescued you and picked you up off the street. If you're comfortable with hearing that, then fine. Right? It's up to you. Or you can just go find Joe Blow, whom you and he work in the same environment, have the same issues, and he's like, well, we'll pull our resources together and together we can make $1 million. I am just saying, people. I am just saying, you see all these young girls who get caught up, all these girls who are on Instagram, and this is them all day. And they're an Instagram influencer. And some guy, who is wealthy enough is watching them. So he inboxes them and DMs them. And he sends a plane ticket for them to fly out to wherever he is. And she's walking into it thinking she's going to be his next great big love. No, he sees an opportunity. And so she's in it thinking she is one. And it doesn't work that way. You're going to get heartbroken and probably end up with a child in child support court. You're lucky if you live, because sometimes they bump them off or they make sure you have such a hard time, right? But people don't think like that. They're still thinking I'm the one and I have so much power, and they're so this and that. Ladies, men are interchangeable. Men view women, most men, especially men who are well-moneyed, believe they have options. You don't believe me? Look at Jeffrey Epstein. He was a billionaire. He had a stable of women. He could afford to buy women. He had a whole business dedicated to supplying young girls. He got them picked up in Eastern Europe and put on a plane and taken to his house, either in Palm Beach, West Palm Beach, or his house in New York. Read the story. Do you see what I'm saying? So don't be unequally yoked with someone. If being trustworthy is an issue for you, but for that person it's interchangeable or it's a variable, then you probably don't need to be there. That's a whole lot of headache and heartache. And you will find that as you live together, you have to be equally and on the same level, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. That's where it begins. People are not together intellectually. You don't know what is real and what is not. You don't have the same values. You believe that you should get married. He doesn't believe that you need a piece of paper to prove something. You're not trying to prove anything. You're trying to protect yourself so that if anything happens, his children or his family members don't show up and tell you you need to leave. If he has to go to the hospital or you have to go to the hospital, what are the protections? Trust is a major, major important pillar of a relationship, and intimate relationships demand that trust be present. You have to be able to look in that person's face and say, is this someone I can trust with the rest of my life? Are you someone? You have to be able to. And I don't advocate you go on an expedition to bring your girlfriends or whoever to come over and test them to see if they're going to respond. No. Why don't you just let it play out and watch? Let them be themselves so that you can see, right? Because you need to know. Because in order for you to prosper in that relationship, you need to know. So we started out this segment by saying Deion Sanders had this thing, and he was asking the question, ladies, can your man trust you? Do you have his back? And I'm like, that's a lot of responsibility you're putting on women. What about him? Does he have her back? Can she trust him? And the counter to that was, well, if you're around all of his friends, can he trust you that you will stay the same? And my thing is, can she trust you when you're around all her friends and her family? Or will you run off and go cheat with every person that you meet? Trust is important. And in today's world, we as women, a smart woman realizes that she's the flavor of the month. Hopefully she'll be the flavor of a lifetime. But right now, she's the flavor of the month. Some women think, well, I'm here because I'm the greatest and I do it this way and I do it that way. And he has $1 million that he can go call up somebody and say, I'll give you $1,000 right now to do unto me what I want. Is that someone you can absolutely trust? You need someone who thinks like you do. You have to. It's safer and it's better for you. And don't think that, well, he'll come around 10 years from now. Are you willing to wait in misery and heartache and pain that every time he leaves, he's gone to someone else? Or are you going to say, this is it? And ladies, you have to know when to call it. And you have to know, and for men too, you're with someone, but she doesn't want to get married, but you want to get married. Well, why not talk about it? And if your interests are not on the same level, well, it's nice to know you and keep it moving. Life is too short to live in unhappiness. There are too many broken marriages and relationships because we get together for the wrong reason. We got to understand that sexual chemistry is sexual chemistry. Anybody can be attracted to anybody physically, but are you mentally and emotionally stimulated? If that does not take place, that's that nexus where your mental, your emotional, and your physical, that mind, body, spirit. When that nexus happens, that's a good union. But if all that is uniting are your bodies, that's not a good formula for long-term commitment. Because when that starts to wear and tear starts happening, and the issues of life present themselves, you'll find that you are two different people with two different approaches to life. And in today's world, people think they have options, just like men think they have options. Women think they have options. Women think, I don't have to be with anybody. I can do what I want to do. I can live by myself. I'm independent. And, frankly, that had to happen because men had women. And then, you guys were kind of ignoring us and treating us badly. So we had to become financially independent to the point where we have our own stuff. So if you are not there, we won't fall, right? Trust is important. You don't believe me? Go to a divorce court and listen to what happens when trust leaves the relationship. And you will find that what you underestimated became something that mushroomed into a cannonball at the end of it all, right? Find someone you trust, and then you can settle. You'll be happier, and you'll be more content, and it will last longer, right? I trust this message has been a blessing to you. Go to my website, harrietkemmick.com. Remember to help us as we help victims of violence. Go to the exodusfoundation.com. Help us as we continue to provide for victims of human sex trafficking. That's what we do. We look at victims, they come to us, and we have to provide services to them. So help us as we do that. Go to the exodusfoundation.com for more information on what we do. Go buy my books. They're available on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com. Thank you for your kind support. And as usual, go to our YouTube page where you can find more shows like these that we've just talked about on more issues that matter. I thank you for your time this morning. It's been my honor. And it's been my pleasure to share with you from the wellspring of our own experiences, what happens in relationships. Come September, we'll start broadcasting on Sundays as well. And we will start having more motivational speaks where you can download those and listen to them every day starting in September, right? In the meantime, it's still summer. Go out and live gloriously. Go out on your boat, go on the lake, go to the beach, go play a game of golf, play a game of tennis. Enjoy the vitamin D that's naturally available in the sunshine. So that come fall, when we start hibernate during winter, that's what we do. You'll be okay. All right. Be blessed, everybody. See you tomorrow. Thanks so much. I enjoyed this. Ray Ellis. We will be in touch. Thanks so much, everybody. Raven. Hey, girlfriend. See you tomorrow or sometime, right? Be blessed.